already running wild. He'd convinced himself that Tripper was hiding a fourth roommate, a real man, who was avoiding the rent. "I'm going up there," Stanley declared, grabbing his master key. "I'm going to catch the Phantom of the Opera in the act." In apartment 201, the butter churn was currently malfunctioning. It had jammed mid-cycle, and soapy water was starting to seep onto the kitchen floor. "Jack, do something," Jonna cried, hiking up her skirt as she stood on a chair. "It's going to ruin the linoleum." "I've got it. I just need leverage," Jack shouted. He grabbed a broom handle and inserted it into the crank. At that exact moment, Stanley burst through the door. "Aha! I knew it. Where is he?" Jack, startled, slipped on a patch of soap. The broom handle swung around like a propeller, catching the edge of a stack of cookbooks. The books flew into the air just as the washing machine decided to unjam with a violent k-thunk. A deluge of soapy water and wet socks erupted from the top, drenching Stanley from head to toe. A single, pink-striped sock landed perfectly on his head. "The Phantom," Stanley sputtered, wiping bubbles from his eyes. "I saw him. He's tall, he's invisible, and he's wearing a broom." Jack stood up, dripping wet. "Mr. Roper, it's just the new European cleaning system. It's very high-tech. The bubbles are part of the deep cleansing aesthetic." Stanley looked at the pink sock. He looked at the soap-covered floor. He looked at the three roommates who were trying very hard not to laugh. "This building is falling apart," Stanley muttered, turning to leave. "And I'm charging you for the water damage. And the sock." "Wait, Stanley." Helen appeared in the doorway, laughing. "You look 20 years younger with those bubbles. Almost like you have a soul." The roommates spent the next 3 hours scrubbing the floor. But as Jack wrung out the last of the wet laundry, he realized that even with the soap suds and the grumpy landlord, there was no place he'd rather be. Chapter 9, The Anniversary of Disasters. As the months rolled on, the 20th anniversary of Stanley and Helen Roper arrived. It was a milestone that Helen had been dreading, mostly because she knew Stanley's idea of a celebration involved a buy-one, get-one free coupon at the local bowling alley. "I want something special, Stanley," Helen said, her voice unusually soft. "I want to feel like we're in New York again. Like when we were young and you didn't have a favorite brand of antacid." Stanley looked panicked. "But the bowling alley has disco night on Wednesdays. Helen, they turn on a purple light. It's very romantic." Jonna, ever the peacemaker, decided the roommates should host a surprise anniversary dinner for the Ropers. It would be a gesture of goodwill, and perhaps it would distract Stanley from the fact that Jack had accidentally broken the balcony railing during a particularly enthusiastic dance lesson with Chrissy. "We'll do a 1940s theme," Jonna planned. "Big band music, candlelight, and Jack's Beef Wellington. I'll handle the decorations." Chrissy volunteered. "I've got some leftover streamers from my cousin's baby shower. They say it's a boy, but if we turn them inside out, they're just Blue. The night of the anniversary arrived. The apartment was transformed. Candles flickered in empty wine bottles, and the smell of roasting beef wafted through the halls. Jack was in his element, wearing a tuxedo jacket he'd borrowed from Larry, which was 3 sizes too large and smelled faintly of used car upholstery. "Go get them, Jack," Jonna whispered. "Tell them there's a leak in the ceiling." Jack went downstairs and lured the Ropers up. When they entered, the lights snapped on. Surprise! Stanley clutched his chest. "I knew it! The roof finally gave way. I'm being sued." "No, Stanley," Helen whispered, her eyes widening as she saw the elegant table. "It's a party. For us." The dinner started perfectly. The music was soft, the food was exquisite, and for the first time in a decade, Stanley and Helen weren't arguing. They were actually smiling. But then, disaster struck in the form of a rogue candle and Chrissy's "It's a Boy" streamers. A stray spark caught the edge of a blue ribbon, and within seconds, the decorations were a blazing inferno of crepe paper. "Fire!" Stanley screamed, grabbing the nearest liquid, which happened to be a priceless bottle of vintage red wine Jack had been saving for the toast. He doused the flames, but in the process, he drenched Helen's favorite white dress in a deep, permanent shade of burgundy. The roommates stood in frozen horror. The romantic evening was ruined. The streamers were ash. The wine was gone, and Helen looked like she'd survived a grape-treading accident. But then Helen started to laugh. It wasn't a giggle. It was a deep, belly-shaking roar. "Oh, Stanley," she gasped, wiping wine from her cheek. "You haven't been this exciting since you accidentally drove the car into the Hudson River." Stanley looked at his wife. He looked at the wine-stained dress. "You're not mad?" "Mad? Stanley, this is the most attention you've paid me in years. And look at the bright side the dress matches your eyes when you're angry." The night ended with the 5 of them sitting on the floor, eating beef Wellington with their hands and listening to the waves of the Pacific crashing in the distance. As the Ropers headed downstairs, Stanley paused at the door. "Tripper, the food wasn't bad for a guy who uses too much garlic." Chapter 10. The Mystery of the Lavender Envelope. A week of torrential rain had turned Santa Monica into a gray, moody version of its usual self. Inside apartment 201, the humidity was doing strange things to the wallpaper and even stranger things to Chrissy's hair. "It's a letter," Chrissy squealed, waving a delicate lavender envelope she had pulled from the mailbox. "And it smells like spring in a blender." Jonna leaned over, her curiosity piqued. "Who's it for?" "It doesn't say," Chrissy replied, her eyes wide. "It just says to the most beautiful tenant in 201. That could be any of us." Jack, who was currently wrestling with a stubborn clove of garlic, snorted. "Most beautiful. Well, let's look at the facts. Jonna has the brains, Chrissy has the pigtails, and I have the classic Mediterranean bone structure. It's obviously for me. It's written in purple ink. Jack, Shauna pointed out. Unless you've taken up calligraphy and started admiring your own reflection in a new way, I think it's for one of the girls. They opened it with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for royal decrees. Inside was a single,